Greetings and salutations, I'm Terran Reviews. Are you jaded with modern video games? Have you taken the quality of life improvements for granted? Are you tired of killing reasonable amounts of enemies? Well, I've got something for you, but not everyone will like it. Today I'll be taking you back in time for a quick video game history lesson. We'll be heading back to 2002 to be precise. Engage in covert, tactical, squad-based spec ops against Saddam's regime in the first Gulf War, where you take on hordes of Iraqi soldiers, Soviet T-72s and APCs. Seriously, where on earth are they getting all these things? Welcome to 1990, and welcome to a game from my earlier years and memories. You may not like it, but these memories are mine. Try as you might, but you can't take those away from me. Reject modernity and embrace the sixth console generation with all its jankiness and nostalgic memories. This is Conflict Desert Storm, or if you're dyslexic, Conflict Desert Storm. Made by Pivotal Games, who made the same game in a row for 4 years, just set in different time periods and locations. They made the first Desert Storm game while their parent company, Kaboom Studios, was having financial problems at the time. SCI saw an opportunity and acquired the company. In 2005, SCI merged with Eidos Interactive, and in 2008, SCI closed down 14 projects in reaction to a near 100 million net loss from the previous year. As a result, Pivotal Games closed their doors during August of 2008, and the rest is history. Desert Storm is a game where you can switch between first person and third person shooter modes, with tactical elements where you can take control of squad members and give them basic orders. Oddly enough, these days, on PC, only the first game is available for purchase on your typical online retail services, despite all of the Conflict games being on PC during their debuts. You either have to find a CD that hasn't been molested by someone else or by the passage of time for the other games, or you can turn to emulation. I sure hope you guys have a working PS2 BIOS that you have legally obtained, or it's off to jail with you. You abhorrent human being, you're literally worse than Hitler, Stalin and Mao combined. But don't worry, I won't tell anyone. It'll be our little secret. Being a game of almost 20 years, Conflict Desert Storm hasn't exactly aged like wine. Then again, neither did American intervention in the Middle East. What did he mean by this? Well, it's got some technical issues that we've got to iron out. In the first cutscene, we are greeted with broken, super speed animations. I got a chuckle out of this one. Since the physics are tied to the frame rate, you get some issues when it isn't capped to 60. It also seems to affect the mouse sensitivity too. It just felt sluggish to me, and it goes without saying, but your options for aspect ratio you want are limited. DG Voodoo 2 is our friend. I used it to set the FPS and desired resolution. This also alleviated the mouse issues. Surprisingly, these were the only problems I came across, well apart from one cutscene bug later on. But I'm not sure why this happened or how to fix it. It's probably a shader issue. The tutorial is optional and is pretty basic, but if anything that's good because it gets to the point. You're shown the core tenets of Desert Storm's gameplay: movement, weapons, controlling a squad, vehicles, tanks having directional armor, and how to call in off-map support. This is probably the biggest blue balls A10 ever.
Good work, soldier! Calling in airstrikes with a laser designator is an excellent way of taking out enemy tanks, hardened buildings, and even bridges! Now take out the other tank!
Wow. Once we're finished, we're now ready for the big leagues, and without any hazing too. Even if you don't touch the tutorial, you're slowly introduced to controlling your squad over the course of a few missions. You start alone, then you have 2 guys, then 3, then the whole gang's together. So even if you're an intellectual midget and have a room temperature IQ, you won't feel overwhelmed. Well, I hope not, as I'm shocked and amazed at how you managed to get here. When you actually get to the gameplay, you quickly begin to realise that the third person aiming feels janky. It feels unrefined. Luckily, you can transition between first and third person at a push of a button. I came to the conclusion that you want to use third person to move around in open areas, then transition to first person for shooting in tight areas. Being a 6th gen game comes with some disadvantages. You can't move and change items at the same time. Since this game is trying to go for a tactical take with the gameplay, LMGs can't be fired on the go, meaning there's a delay before you can shoot. If anything, it feels as if there is some input delay when it comes to the time it takes for your gun to fire after moving with any weapon when you've pressed mouse 1. You'll quickly switch to maining more mobile characters, as this game loves to catch you off guard, especially if you're not careful. I've definitely been spoiled by more recent third person shooters, but as a qualified video game historian and enthusiast, I believe it's important that we keep in mind where we were and where we're heading in terms of technical and gameplay evolution. You only need a Bachelor of Science and a Master's degree to point this out, finally putting them degrees to good use. Each operator of your squad has different weapons, equipment and training with said gear. They have experience for the gear of their respective roles. For instance, Jones specialises in close range combat and demolitions, and as such he has an MP5, a shotgun, C4 and some mines. None of the other members have these. They all have a role to play, from being a marksman to a heavy weapons expert. If your guys see an enemy and you don't, they get placed on the compass. They'll look in the same direction you're currently looking, and on occasion they'll heal themselves when you're not in direct control. You can switch to any soldier at a moment's notice, order them to a specific location, or give them general commands like hold a position or follow. Though moving up with your whole team will occasionally result in you getting your whole squad killed, which is a quick way to fail. Since you can switch soldiers, you can heal wounded comrades with the application of a first aid kit, so moving up slowly and one at a time is probably the best course of action. How does a first aid kit reverse the effects of a high explosive tank shell? Well, it's actually quite simple, but I don't have much time to explain the details. We just reapply all the limbs that are out of place and stuff back in any organs using the copy and paste functions on your keyboard. I mean, come on, it's not hard. We all learned this within the first few hours of the Tactical Combat Casualty Care Combat Lifesaver course. In all seriousness, I don't know. It's video games, I ain't gotta explain shit. The game has a simple level system that boils down to each character getting increases in rank and having their gear training increase. Rank increases appear to be window dressing. It's not really explained by the game what gets improved with the increase of stars, but I'm guessing that a soldier with 4 stars in something is going to be better at aiming an assault rifle, or doing something better than an FNG would. Honestly, I'm not sure I noticed much of a difference. The 6th gen didn't baby you, hold your hand or play the game for you. Arguably it was the last gen that turned boys into men and treated big-brained gamers with some level of respect. The game also keeps track of the hordes of soldiers that you kill, and awards you medals for acts as a pro gamer carrying out pro gamer moments. It's nice being able to check your overall stats. Your boys have their own gear but can take and receive items. Worried that you might pick up an RPG with the guy that isn't an anti-vehicle expert? One of your guys low on first aid kits? Well, thanks to the item management system you can relax, because any moment can become a moment of charity. You'll find yourself grabbing enemy equipment at some point during most missions, which is basically a must since you'll be fighting more soldiers and tanks than the fella with the beret had at the time. Also, some missions will be two-parters, meaning your resources and health will carry over to the next stage. I didn't really have much of a problem with low resources, but you need to be somewhat mindful of your actions. It provides a nice level of detail to attention and immersion. There's an aesthetically pleasing map that gives you detailed information on what the terrain looks like, what your objectives are, and where they are, so you never feel lost. If you're unsure on what you needed to do, I mean, it's not exactly rocket science, but just press F1 and away you go. The objectives are usually straightforward and easy to find. At the beginning of the game you can pick to play as either the SAS or Delta Force. This doesn't really change much in game, other than the briefing voice actor and the squad voices.
Foley is being held in a small building northeast of the bridge. Secure the position, then rescue Foley. Intelligence indicates that the best approach is along this dry riverbed. This border checkpoint is heavily guarded and should be avoided.
Foley is being held in a small building northeast of the bridge. Secure the position, then rescue Foley. Intelligence indicates that the best approach is along this dry riverbed. This border checkpoint is heavily guarded and should be avoided.
Personally, I picked the SAS because the guy giving you orders in the briefing just sounds better when it comes to the voice acting, and doesn't sound like he's falling asleep in the sound booth. Regardless, it's nice that the option is there. Just because you're playing as Special Forces, don't think that you won't be able to use vehicles. You get introduced to using a Humvee and a Bradley APC. They both feel somewhat stiff in the mobility department. The mouse controls the direction and motion and where you're looking at the same time. It's not so bad, but it isn't exactly the best way to utilise a mouse and keyboard control scheme. Also, if you remember what I said earlier about having your whole squad get wiped, having your whole squad in these vehicles is a surefire way to fail the mission. The Bradley APC is quite disappointing. If you know anything about tanks, then you'll know that the Bradley is equipped with a 25mm autocannon. But in this game it just feels like a generic machine gun. But that's not all. When you have your squad in the APC, there'll always be someone who insists on sitting exposed where the commander's cupola is located. I don't know what compels these troglodytes to want to ride shotgun, especially if it results in bullet poisoning. This means you have to micromanage your squad seats and leave some of them outside of the tank to avoid having to get out, constantly revive them. If anything, these methods of conveyance introduce more problems than they solve. Once your vehicle starts smoking, they'll move at a snail's pace, which means it's time to ditch them and move on. Don't worry, they totally won't be used against you in the coming years. In general, you use these contraptions to take out whatever targets you can and get from point A to B, though if you're patient, unlike me, you can use these machines to get from point A to Z. Well, maybe not Z, but close enough. The game keeps implying that stealth is a viable option, everything from mission briefings,
Infiltrate the compound under cover of the air raid without raising the alarm.
objectives page, giving you suppressed weapons, and even down to some of the mechanics implies that you can stealth. Or can you? Nope. Like a dysfunctional relationship, the game keeps sending me mixed messages. You can take out a whole area silently, only for a guard to spawn and take a dead guard's place, within the space of mere seconds. That's when the alarm is raised and the element of surprise is thrown out of the window. Again, it's a 6th gen game, so I'm not really surprised. This just isn't a stealth game. The AI is stupid, and on occasion is empty-headed. They won't react to their comrades dying in front of them. When the alarm is raised, they'll know your exact zip code, and some of them will beeline straight towards you. They'll move towards you until you are in range of their guns. I even saw them destroy one of their own scud launchers once. That's how dumb they can be. Since we're looking at an artifact from the technological equivalent of the medieval era, this game makes heavy use of respawning enemies, probably in an attempt to pad the game's length by artificially increasing the difficulty. Padding the game length might trick people into believing that they are getting more for their money. It's an old trick and it probably fooled people back in the day. You'll often find yourself witnessing enemies popping up in endless waves, and they'll even spawn right behind you, mere moments after they were just killed. You just have to carefully move up past trigger points or enter a building to stop the enemies from spawning. Even when you do that, there's no guarantee that they won't spawn from said building again. Not only that, but there's some bullshit placement for some of these guys, like an RPG placed at a long hallway, or above a bridge that you have to walk under. I know that Saddam at one point had one of the world's largest regimes, but there are probably different ways that you could have implemented this. Speaking of padding and artificially increasing the game's playtime, there's no quick saving and the save system only lets you save all of 2 times. Yes, that's right, a whole 2 times. I get that this game is trying to be somewhat tactical, but the average playing experience will become one of frustration and depression the moment you forget to take your government-mandated antidepressants because you died and your last save was used up 15 to 20 minutes ago. Being a 2002 game, this game has visuals that only the most dedicated mothers could love. If anything, I have to give them props for accurately depicting British people. I too often feel like I'm living in a boring low-poly nightmare. Also, considering that this game takes place in a desert, the colour palette is limited. You'll be seeing a lot of brown and yellow. This might not be your bread and butter. Even for the time, MGS2 came out in 2001 while going for the photorealism look, but I'm not really bothered by dated visuals. Anything from the early 2000s is going to look like a fever dream when compared to today. However, if you want my advice, never let visuals stop you from playing something you might actually enjoy. There's this fog that prevents you from seeing too far ahead. Not even the Eye of Sauron can see through this bullshit. There is a graphics option to increase the draw distance, but this actually makes things harder for you as enemies react to you from further away. If you want my advice? Keep it off. Overall, the levels are somewhat simplistic in their layout. Sometimes you'll be fighting in a city that actually has different routes, and other times you'll be moving down desert valleys and roads. Even the simpler levels provide you with opportunities to flank if you don't like your chances head on. I fondly remember a couple of missions having a transition from daytime to nighttime. This meant you could increase your tactical operator stats by 10 by equipping NVGs. Just don't fire unsuppressed weapons if you value your retinas. Audio isn't the game's strong suit either. Voice chatter is low quality, and I'm pretty sure some of the weapons are stock sound effects. There's also syncing issues. Weapon fire doesn't always line up with your shooting. Helicopters make very little sound. The default audio level mixing isn't exactly great either. You only have 2 options, and I'd recommend dropping the soundtrack a bit so you can hear the sound of enemy vehicles in the distance. Honestly, the OST is quite generic. I remember probably 1 or 2 tracks. The tracks were also looped for the whole mission and only changed to a combat version of that particular track when combat starts. and then the track goes back to normal. If anything, the OST is what you'd expect for a game like this, so it fits the military setting, but on the whole, it's largely forgettable and uninspired. Premise-wise, you're doing operate shit out in the desert, so there's no dramatic twist or Oscar-worthy story to be found here. Sometimes life is just that, another mundane meat grinder in some faraway country. You go from blowing up enemy infrastructure and other military targets, to preventing Scud launchers from shooting rockets at our greatest allies in Tel Aviv. The loading screens provide some info about what's going on in the overall Gulf War. You get briefing text and video cutscenes before the start of a mission, which would become a staple of the modern military shooter genre. The text feels redundant since they mostly repeat the same info. You could have stuck with the cutscenes and that would have got the job done. One level takes place in a city where Nighthawks are dropping bombs and rockets are being fired at it. All this is merely a distraction for your team to slip in and rescue some POWs. I'm sitting there thinking, nice, I can put my skills to the test. Only for the AA gunner, who is looking into the sky and firing his super loud weapon, to suddenly switch to me. I didn't even do anything. Could you imagine if your country's government wasted all that money for a mere distraction that didn't last 2 minutes? Also, there are more soldiers than the population of Iraq itself. Look, I know Iraqis are trained from birth to become soldiers, but come on, are these guys running a Spartan society? I will say one thing though, Nighthawk's always great to see. Towards the end of the game, your fourth guy gets replaced with an unarmed and uncontrollable civilian that needs to be escorted to a WMD. You'll be down on manpower and on resources against a horde of tanks and respawning enemies. Oh, and did I mention that this is a 2-part mission too? It's definitely an experience, one that I wish I could erase from my mind. Staring at my sub counter would be a more enjoyable experience. You'll get to the end and the Iraqi army retreats. Kuwait is liberated and the Middle East live happy ever after. And that was the last time the West got involved in Middle Eastern conflicts. I made the mistake of trying to take a stealth approach in the beginning, which you of course know by now was a mistake. We can add that to the list of bad ideas that happened last year. I slowly moved in, behind their line of sight, and aimed my suppressed pistol, only to find that a headshot doesn't kill. That or the bullet I fired entered a different reality, parallel to our own. Yeah, don't go in expecting a realistic take on the Gulf War. If you had a PS2 back in 2002 but never played this game, you might be thinking of a similar game called SOCOM. SOCOM had a stronger emphasis on the tactical elements where you could give squad orders beyond just move commands. SOCOM came out initially on the 27th of August in 2002, and Desert Storm came out less than a month later on the 13th of September in Europe. How crazy is that? When looking at how many copies both games sold, I'm not surprised SOCOM sold more. It was more refined and didn't throw endless waves at you. You actually got the impression that the game wanted you to feel and act like a Spec Ops team going in and doing operator shit, and usually doing it quietly too, instead of mindlessly shooting hordes of enemies. I had all of the conflict games on the PS2 at some point, and I fondly remember playing split screen co-op from time to time. Sadly, the PC version does not have this feature. Not surprising really. There is multiplayer, though I couldn't get a game going or knew anyone who had this game, so I did what anyone would do and checked YouTube, and there is actually some footage of multiplayer. It looks like something that I might enjoy, though it seems that vehicles are just objects in the world. Would I recommend this game? If you enjoy expanding your bank of knowledge and experience and are always looking to play older games, then I'd say it can't hurt. It serves as a history lesson and teaches us what we've gained and what we've lost, and how we've taken a lot for granted, but at the same time how our hobby and this medium has become solely concerned with maximising profit by a factor of 100. Of course, if you're not into older games with a limited colour palette and with a side of jank, then it wouldn't kill you to opt out. Otherwise, I'd say that you're probably not missing out on much. If you are interested in the third-person squad shooters from that time that don't pad their game length, then I suggest looking into the SOCOM series. For me, it was a healthy reality check where my nostalgia was set aside and my biases were challenged, allowing me to properly evaluate my younger self's preconceptions, allowing me to grow as a person. I mean, it has been 14 or so years since I've played this game, maybe more. I don't actually remember how long it's been. This may be a sign of my impending doom at the hands of early onset dementia. Nevertheless, I enjoyed my first time with this game, but it has obviously not aged well. If you enjoyed this video, I do have more content on the way. I've got a Mass Effect 2 project in the works. I've got more than enough material to use, and hopefully I'll have something out by the end of this month or February. It's going to take a while, and it might end up being longer than the first Mass Effect video, and I've got a lot on my plate right now. Also, feel free to suggest games that I should check out. I've got a doc that I'll pin in the comments to keep track of all of them. I'm totally not stealing this idea from anyone or anything. Thank you for watching, and play it safe out there.
Have you seen the assassin?
Why are you looking for him? You're not one of Nasana's mercs. Who are you?
You've got two ways down. Express or coach. Your choice.
Look, pal. Even if I knew where he was, I wouldn't tell you.
Not the answer I was looking for.
I've got nothing more to say to you. If you shoot me, my team's right through.
How about goodbye?